co-chair of the Housing, Health, and Human Services Committee. Maria will give you the opening spiel as to how we operate.
Can y'all hear me well? Perfect. So I'm Maria Ortiz, co-chair of Housing, Health, and Human Services. This is our monthly meeting. It's held every first Thursday of the month, except August, thankfully. And we are meeting here in the office. This is our first hybrid meeting, so there will be, like Joe said, some bumps in the road, but we are doing our best. And I have to look at my notes, even though I do this every month. Okay. The agenda is public. It's on the CB4 website. If you are not part of the if you are not registered for the e-blast, if you could sign up, that would be great. Then you can have all the information CB4 has to offer. If this is your first time at the meeting, the first thing to remember is that the presenters speak first, and then committee members will ask questions or make comments. Then it turns over to the public, who will then ask questions or make comments. And if you do want to speak, I don't know if anyone is new here, but if you do want to speak, you just have to raise your hand, use the raise hand function. Then third, the conversation goes back to the committee members, and sometimes we write a letter or write a resolution that goes to full board and gets voted on at that time. And I did want to go around the room, and if we could introduce ourselves. I will start with, I'm going to pick out who's going to introduce themselves. Betty, can you go first?
Hi, Betty McIntosh, a member of the Housing, etc. Committee.
Roberta?
Hi, Roberta Barnett, member of the Housing, Health, and Human Services Committee.
Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Stokes, one of the members of the committee.
Yeah. Oh my God,
Hector.
thank you.
I'm Victor Vasquez, member of the committee as well.
And we have several new board members with us tonight joining the committee for the first time. So if you can introduce yourselves and tell us a little about yourselves so we get oriented, starting with Rachel.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Rachel Lee. Happy to be here. This is my first committee meeting after joining the CB4. Very excited. I'm an attorney by day, and now a CB member at night.
And what's your part of the neighborhood you live in?
Sure. I live near Columbus Circle, so in Hell's Kitchen. Been there for 5 years. Call myself a proud New Yorker now, and I work near the Rockefeller Center building.
Great. Wilson, let's go to you.
Hi, how are you? Good evening, everyone. My name is Wilson Cano. I am super happy to be here and honored. I am not a resident of CB4, but I am an employee at CB4 and actually spend more time at CB4 than I do in my own house. I am working the nonprofit field in CB4, and I'm happy to be part of this team.
And I think you should know you're Deputy Executive Director of the Hudson Guild. People know who that is.
Yes, thank you.
Let's go to Raul.
Important to know that.
Yeah.
So my name is Raul Larios. I live in Hell's Kitchen as well. I'm chairman of volunteer Rachel. This is my second time as committee board 4. I served, gosh, over 10 years ago. Bloomer was mayor, I think, in the transition to de Blasio. So happy to be here.
And what do you do? Which background?
Yes, I work in with nonprofits as well. I'm a finance director. Right now, serving as treasurer with an organization called Open Plans, whose mission is to expand and improve our streets here in New York City. That's pretty much it.
Thank you. Let's go to Lisa David.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Delighted to be here and a new member of the committee and board. I have lived in Chelsea on West 21st Street between 8th and 9th since 1985. So well aware of all kinds of changes that have happened in the neighborhood over time. I am also the president and CEO of a nonprofit called Public Health Solutions that provides human services in all 5 boroughs of New York City, access to food, health insurance, sexual and reproductive health, a lot of maternal child health, tobacco control, and the like.
Thank you, Lisa. And we have one long-term member, Dolores Rubin. Can you respond, Dolores? Is your connection okay?
Sorry, connection's not that okay. I apologize. I'll try to see if I can connect on a better device in a bit. Dolores Rubin, lifelong Hell's Kitchen resident. I'm also a member of the Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee, and I've been on the board, I don't know, maybe now it's 10 or 11 years.
And a former chair of the board also.
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna start. We have a presentation by the Community Land Trust Initiative. We'll have them introduce themselves, discuss it with us, and then we'll ask them questions, and then have us bring in the public to the degree that the public has questions for them. So either Val or Katya, who's the lead on this?
Yeah.
Katya.
All right, my name is Katya Ducat. Some of you may remember me as Karen Smith. I've lived in Chelsea in Penn South since 1962, and I am currently the chair of the board of This Land Is Ours. I'm here with two of my colleagues from This Land Is Ours CLT on the Lower East Side, Val Arcelli and Tito Delgado. Tito's a board member, Val is the executive director. Val is going to be mostly explaining to people who may not be aware of what CLTs are, a little bit about their history and what relevance it has to CB4. Just so you know, Val was the executive director of the Mutual Housing Association down in Cooper Square area for 20 years, and he was the executive director of the CLT for 2 years, and now he's executive director, as I said, of This Land Is Ours CLT. We are in the process of getting some land and trying to build CLTs on 3 different sites on the Lower East Side. But Val's also been on the CLT up in East Harlem. And Tito Delgado, besides being an activist his whole life down in housing on the Lower East Side and now in Chelsea, is a member of the board and so much more. So I'm going to turn it over quickly to Val, who's going to explain a little bit about what CLTs are and the history. Go ahead, Val.
And how they're relevant. Thank you very much, Katya, and thank you all the members of the committee for inviting me to make this presentation. I'm always very eager to make presentations to spread the word about community land trusts in New York City. I'm going to start with a few obvious facts that maybe not everyone is aware of, and then go on to explaining what a CLT is. Affordable housing in New York City, as we all know, is in very limited supply. According to a recent report published by the Furman Center, over 25% of New York City renters earning between $30,000 and $50,000 per year pay more than 50% of their income towards rent. In addition, roughly 60,000 people sleep in shelters each night, a figure that has only risen every year since 1984. And this number doesn't take into account the recent influx of undocumented immigrants who are coming to New York City in droves, and there's no suitable housing yet prepared for them. Community land trusts are uniquely designed to stabilize housing in New York City in light of these disturbing trends by clustering otherwise economically unviable properties into a single corporation, then stewarding such property towards permanent affordable use. Community land trusts are nonprofit organizations that acquire and manage land in order to develop permanently affordable housing, not for 20, 30, or 40 years, but in perpetuity. CLTs accomplish this by acquiring properties and then conveying the improvements and leasing the land to building owners who sell or rent homes to low and moderate income families at below market rates. While those CLTs retain ownership of the land and pursuant to a 99-year ground lease performs a stewardship role towards the improvements. I should mention as a side also that while our focus is on affordable housing, CLTs can take many forms. We are currently, for example, working with a committee to try to bring back a beloved community center to the Lower East Side. And many properties, the gardens, are owned by the Trust for Public Land as another form of a land trust. But our focus, my focus, is on affordable housing. This Land Is Ours CLT was formed in 2019, one of more than 15 CLTs formed in New York City in recent years in all the 5 boroughs, including Queens and Staten Island. This Land Is Ours is comprised of housing activists Community organizes a neighborhood residence. It seeks to acquire underutilized buildings, troubled HDFCs, or privately owned properties and publicly owned land in order to build and preserve affordable housing and prevent displacement and preserve communities. Using this community-controlled model, this land is ours is also committed to ensuring that low-income communities or communities of color as stewards of the land, housing, economic development, and other essential resources. I should mention also, without getting into a lot of details, that the COT performs this unique stewardship role. It has a board made up of three parts: community residents, public representatives, and residents of the land owned by the COT. The COT, by virtue of having a ground lease with the owner of the improvements, has representation on the board of the building that's constructed, but they have a minority representation. So 2/3 of the board of a mutual housing association, which is a cooperative of many buildings, are residents, and 1/3 are appointed by the COT. And that is basically what a COT is about. There's about over 230 COTs around the city. It came out of the civil rights movement. I'm not going to go into that, but it was a way to help prevent displacement and to preserve communities. One thing that we'd like to do, there's a current controversy, for example, regarding community preference, where there's a lawsuit pending where the HPD's version of community preference has been found to be discriminatory, has been alleged to be discriminatory. And we're trying to implement or to promote a new view of a community preference consisting of the right to remain and the right to return. COTs are social housing, and in many ways is very similar to NYCHA housing, public housing, which is also social housing, but there are some significant differences, okay? First of all, of course, we target our population to be low-income people. There'll be specific targets, with tenants, in order to qualify for housing, must meet those income levels or be below them. But once they are in, if the tenant is able to improve his or her economic condition by getting a better job or striking it rich in some fashion, we don't penalize those tenants. They're allowed to remain and they continue to pay the same rent or maintenance fee they were paying before, because we believe in every possible way to help the poor. It is not our intent to keep the poor poor. But I think that we can do that by promoting economic development from within. Okay, that's a fair introduction, I guess. People have some questions.
Thank you, Val.
Wait, before we go on, just one second. Val, let's just say to people that we haven't done a total analysis yet of all of the properties in Chelsea and in Clinton. It's come to our attention that more likely they could be CLTs in Clinton than in Chelsea in terms of HDFCs that are in trouble and other things like that. The only other thing I wanted you to mention, Val, is that very often in order to build these, they are not all poor people, majority, but they're also middle-income people that move into these. Could you explain that?
As I stated in my comments, whoever is in occupancy is in occupancy. We don't care what their income level is. If we're only referring to who would move in once, we take ownership of the land and someone takes ownership of the building, that in order to move in, they would have to meet the income requirements or whatever program that we have to go in. And that's also another issue. All too often in New York City, affordable housing, in order to be developed, has to rely to some extent, even if the city provides the building or the land at $1 or a nominal cost, it's required that we borrow some money from some entity, like city CPC, for example, which has to be paid back. And to the extent that a loan has to be paid back, the building cannot really meet the requirements for deep affordability. So as much as possible in our development, as we did in Cooper Square, for example, we like to rely on what they call forgivable loans, in which as long as a building is in compliance with the regulatory agreements and the ground lease, we don't have to pay back the loan. And that allows us to provide deep affordability. As a comparison, for example, the golden standard of affordability is housing affordable to families at 30% of AMI or below. The current affordability level for the Cooper Square Mutual Housing Association housing is between 26% and 35% of AMI, because there's no loan to be paid back.
Thank you, Val. So Katja, could you explain to us, I think everyone, first let's talk about the community land trust idea in general, okay? And then we'll get to the specific issue of where and why this is a useful tool, if it is, for our neighborhood. So questions about community land trust in general, starting with Raul.
None right now.
Hector?
As far as community land trust goes, do you folks deal at all in the realm of affordable level, like HUD, for percent, or just municipal?
I didn't quite get the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Joe, the Joe, sound is bad. Could you translate, please?
No, yeah, it's got to, Hector, a little bit louder into the speaker.
As far as the trust goes, do you folks deal in only municipal, or do you deal on the federal level like HUD? Such as HUD?
I don't, they have not acquired,
Okay.
I mean, to my knowledge, Katja, you maybe have a couple of projects in development, you have not, that is a federal piece of land, correct?
Right.
Oh, we have
Okay.
not.
We haven't acquired yet any property, but we are looking at different possibilities, including, in addition to the properties that we listed, also decommissioned religious properties that may come into the market, and we're hoping to be able to find a way to get hold of them for affordable housing. Case in question, for example, in District 4 might be St. Veronica's Church, that with the efforts partly of members, this land is ours, but other people as well, we were able to take the building off the auction block, but what I understand now is back on the auction block, or at least the Archdiocese has plans to put it back on the auction block.
Well, we all know that the Archdiocese is a wonderful charitable organization that gives land away for free. Let's go to Rachel for questions about community land trust.
Thank you for the very informative presentation, especially the part about how CLTs differ from NYCHA. How do CLTs procure funding?
How they differ from NYCHA?
No,
No,
no, she asked how do they get their funding?
CLTs get their funding essentially through using government programs. No, there's two types of funding. For operating expenses, every year for the last several years, we've been getting discretionary funds from the City Council of New York, which is like for all the 15 CLTs combined is about 1.5 million. And that's currently what's being proposed in the final version of the city's budget. As far as the actual renovation, the funding comes from many city programs that provide for senior housing, assisted living housing, ELA, okay, Section 8. And we're also looking at another way of funding, which happens to be the predominant model elsewhere, like in Europe, but it's not done here, which is through state-issued bond financing, which would allow us to accomplish deep affordability.
Val, you have to remember, watch the acronyms. You have to explain what you're talking about. People will not know what ELA means. So when you speak and present, just be very specific. Otherwise, you're going to lose committee members.
I apologize.
So just I want to note that Val spoke about two different levels here. The 1.5 million from the city budget, that's the CFT organization citywide. Your question was about where do funds come for renovation and operation? And the answer is from government programs, from different sorts of government programs. And then it isn't, there has not been a bond issue in our city or our state ever for a CLT. That's more of a European model. Pete, questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question regarding the, how are you reaching out to the public or the residents in the community, in the various communities, and informing and educating them on land trust? I don't believe many people know about this. The other question I have also is regarding the maintenance. Who will perform the maintenance on the buildings once a building is acquired by the land?
Gotcha.
I'm going to let Val answer that. Go ahead, Val.
Well, maintenance is the same as rent, but it's how it's referred to if it's a cooperative. The Cooper Square MHA is a cooperative project, so they pay rent, but they call it maintenance fee. Okay,
He's talking about repairs.
Who's gonna do the actual repairs? Are we gonna have hire the previous landlord, for example, in the building, to do the very same thing there?
The difference, one important difference between NYCHA and this kind of social housing is that NYCHA basically charges tenants 30% of their income in rent. And if their income goes up, their rent goes up. In the way that COTs are more commonly structured, again, depending on the financing, is after the renovation is completed, we try to charge the tenants what we call the economic rent. We estimated when we did the Cooper Square MHA project, what it would cost to maintain the core area of an apartment where most repairs are needed. And it's simple to say what they are. That's the kitchen and the bathroom, because that's where the most problems arise for the plumbing. The rest of the apartment, which would be the living room and the dining room and so on, you might have some problems with electrical outlets or some other relatively minor problem. So we would charge a lower rent. So we would add the rent that we charge for the core area of an apartment, the area for the remainder of the apartment, plus a little extra, but that goes into a common reserve fund. And the common reserve fund is built up with the years. So when the time comes that even if their building is fully renovated, 20 or 30 years from now, they're going to need a new boiler or maybe a new roof or major capital improvements, that if the families are of low income, they can't afford it. By clustering a number of buildings together that would otherwise be financially unviable individually, we create an economy of scale and help to preserve affordability. Another benefit is that by having a cluster of buildings, we're going to find some buildings have commercial space and some buildings do not. In a typical individual building HDFC, if a building has commercial space, they do very well, but the next door building doesn't have it, doesn't do so well. In our model, the commercial rent is shared amongst all the buildings that make up the Community Land Trust Mutual Housing Association project.
Roberta?
Thank you for this. I had a question about, I guess, what you're thinking about within CB4. You indicated that there might be interest in the acquisition of HDFC cooperatives that might be financially struggling. I would be curious to understand if that is the only consideration within CB4, if there are development considerations, so the development of new housing, or the redevelopment or adaptive reuse of other buildings, and would be curious legally if it is possible to, I guess, change HDFCs and have them be acquired by community land trusts. I'm not familiar with that as a concept.
Well, in terms of development, meaning new construction, we would be looking, I have to say we would be, because we were hoping that through additional funding from the City Council, we could start doing some organizing work in District 4. But right now we're getting the same amount as we got last year, which is a limited amount for this land is ours, $98,000 for everything, okay? But we'll be looking at vacant lots, like right now we're actively working with the city on 2 vacant lots on the Lower East Side, the NYPD parking lot on 5th Street and the NYCHA parking lot on East 6th Street. Could be doing the same thing in District 4. We could also be working with troubled HDFCs. Many HDFCs have expiring tax abatements, and they may not be able to make the transition to full tax payment. If they were to agree to become part of a community land trust, we might be able to do what we did in the Lower East Side and obtain an Article 11 tax abatement, which could be as much as 100% abatement, depending on the income levels of the building. Those are some of the things we'll be looking at.
So let's keep going around the room. I forgot we have the room also there. Lisa, David, any questions about land trust in general? Then we'll get to the specifics of Ward 4.
Can I?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot. I couldn't go back and forth. Should have gone back and forth. Lisa?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm just wondering, I don't know what an HDSC is, but what is the range of types of property? I mean, decommissioned churches.
An HDOC, and I apologize for using abbreviations, stands for Housing Development Fund Company, okay? It's a typical corporate structure in New York State. And it allows the HDFC or the Housing Development Fund Company to obtain certain benefits, tax benefits, and also participate in certain city housing programs. As far as the properties we're looking at, we would be looking at any property which might otherwise be converted to luxury housing or become unaffordable and try to bring them into a cluster that will make them financially viable. And the major problem, of course, is acquisition, because as you know, property in Manhattan is not cheap. So the major source of acquisition would have to be city-owned property or government-owned property. Now, there could be a post office, for example, that could be used for that purpose. We started doing some research in CD4 last year when we were hoping to expand, but we didn't get this necessary funding last year. We're not getting it this year, but we're not giving up. We're still pursuing it.
Let's go to Katie and then followed by Wilson.
Thanks for this presentation. I have to say that CLTs are very new to me, so I'm just trying to understand how they work. It sounds like you're sort of a management organization, that you offer the services, but you're not bringing in obviously the specific funding, or you help figure out the funding. But as you said, the major problem is acquisition of property. I'm just trying to get a sense for what you've done, say in the last 5 or 10 years. How many affordable housing units has this land as ours been able to acquire or help develop? Just so we have a sense of what you've done.
This land is ours, as I mentioned, was established in 2019. And while we have dibs in several properties, we have not yet acquired any property. In my experience as the former director of Cooper Square Mutual Housing Association, we acquired a total of about 21 buildings that were converted to a nonprofit cooperative. They were declared a co-op in 2012. It took time to do so because the buildings were largely fully occupied, so we had to do what's called checkerboarding. We started out with 2 vacant buildings. We renovated them first, and then we moved the tenants from 2 more buildings into those. So it took like 10, 12 years to accomplish that. And overall, it comes to a little over 400 units over a 10-year period. In terms of how many more we intend to, we are looking at a couple of possibilities that would really create a significant difference. But part of the problem to date is that we're getting minimal funding for operating expenses of the CLTs, and there's not yet a funding stream dedicated to community land trust, nor as yet there's any legislation that provide for prioritizing disposition of public land to the CLT. At this point, when there's a piece of public land, the CLTs that are usually more frequently recently formed don't really compete well with a developer who's been around for 15, 20 or more years and can move ahead with the city, not to mention that the HPD and developers are very close working together.
Val, why don't you mention the 3 pieces of legislation that are in front of the city council that will help CLTs right now?
Yeah, there's a cluster of legislation that's been pending before the city council for quite some time. One is COPA, which is the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, that would allow residents of a particular building or a CLT to acquire that property and then, of course, convert it to a nonprofit ownership. There is TOPA, which is not a city legislation, but the city council has been asked to endorse a resolution supporting the state level of the Tenants Opportunity to Purchase Act. Okay. There's also another piece of legislation that's part of the Community Land Act that will prioritize disposition of city-owned property to CLTs or similar nonprofits. Okay.
And I'm sorry, what was the last one called?
I'm sorry.
Other chair.
What was the name of the last piece of legislation?
That was the Tenants Opportunity to Purchase Act, TOPA. Okay.
And the one after that?
After that, there's also prioritizing disposition of city-owned land and buildings to CLTs.
Got it. Thank you.
So we're going to continue, members of the committee, and we're going to try to wrap up. Be aware that, for example, Dallas talked about Cooper Square, right? That was a city-owned or renewable site. There were many occupied buildings, and the solution was a land trust through mutual housing association for that location. So community land trusts have been used at various locations around the city. They are heavily used outside of our state in order to figure out a way to hold property. And the underlying issue is a land trust has the idea that it holds the land and then shares the operation of the building, the improvements on it, with the people who live there. So it's a sort of hybrid between a European model and an American model, kind of back and forth. It's a very common thing, and it has been used somewhat in the city. And I think let's go to further questions from our members online. Jessica Chait, followed by Wilson, about this, and then we'll try to wrap up, and then Betty. Jessica Chait.
Thank you, Joe, but thank you. But I unfortunately I joined late, so I'm very interested in this. I didn't see any material in the Dropbox, so I'd love to review anything that might be able to provide additional context. But okay, but I joined late, so please go to Wilson.
Sure.
Thank you.
Wilson.
No, I'm good. Thank you. Someone already asked the question I already had, so I thank you.
Got it. Betty.
Hi, thank you for the presentation and our education. Couple things. One is, would it make sense for Community Board 4 to write a supportive letter for some of this legislation that's at the City Council that you mentioned? That's one thing. I don't think we have taken a position or an encouragement of that. And I was wondering if in Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen, if the prices of land are just so high that it's not realistic to look for those properties for this program. And the other thing I thought about was old hotels that are empty, and some of them are used as shelters. Could they be potential properties for this program?
I think the answer to that is yes. But first on the legislation, we should get the legislation circulated and people read it or take a position on it so we can be fully informed. And if Karen or Val, if you can send that to Jesse, Bodine, our district manager, so we can distribute it and then really discuss it further. The second thing is, Betty, you're well taken. The cost of land is an underlying issue for affordable housing, no matter what the vehicle for ownership, development, or management is. And the third is the hotels are also land and buildings that have a high cost. So it's always going to be the sort of oddball thing that works in a program like this. The cost of land.
One more thing, Joe, to answer Betty. We haven't done the full analysis as we did in the Lower East Side. To the extent that we may find some parking lots owned by the police or HDFCs that are going under that the tenants may be interested. Those are the kinds of things I think it'll be more in Clinton than Chelsea. I think Chelsea's out, but I think Clinton still has the possibility of having some CLTs, and that's the next line of research that we're going to be doing.
Joe may have some information.
So I would direct you to our housing, affordable housing plan for the board. It has a full inventory of all publicly owned property throughout. And I would say also a word of caution, an HDFC in our district is owned by a tenant cooperative. And if it's in trouble, that's going to be their decision whether or not to give up their ownership and their full stake in the building. Because also, Val mentioned one thing, and that is some HDFC co-ops may have their tax exemption running out. However, they have the ability to apply to extend it and go through a regulatory process. So there's more than one avenue to extend affordability or preservation. I think it's good that we talk about something that is brand new to our district, not brand new, as a possible means and methods, but that's very much going to be about people in place and not just, they're not tenants, they're shareholders, right? As if they want to participate in a program like this. But I guess the good part is starting this off It's a great discussion. So let's go, oh, Dolores didn't speak, and then Lisa, sorry.
Hi there. Hopefully my volume is okay. One thing that I think that is important, considering that we do have an affordable housing plan, which is extremely well researched and thought out. Perhaps once this land is ours does their research, we review as a committee where those can be incorporated within the plan as a potential. Again, we've already identified sites. We've already discussed how much affordability could be developed if it's developed from a traditional development. Adding to the plan, once there's more information, specifics about if there were an opportunity for this to be part of a community land trust, we would expect X, Y, and Z. And I think that's probably the best way to incorporate it within, within the board, instead of taking any positions on legislation that we're not aware of that'll impact properties that we haven't identified yet.
But it doesn't foreclose our ability to do that in the future after we get better study done. Lisa, you have the last word.
I didn't know whether the comment about the archdiocese was tongue in cheek or real, but do we know what the plans for the guardian angels school property is? In Chelsea?
I will say again that we've been very lucky in our district that a lot of our Catholic school properties have been repurposed as public schools. But remember, the archdiocese is still in the business of making money, and they are not easy letting go of property. Beautiful building, Central Maria on 64th Street between 10th and 11th Avenues, historically known as St. Ambrose, a fantastic Gothic church inside, was sold to Extel Development and demolished for a 35-story building. And that was a women's residence that the archdiocese sold.
Yeah.
So, and we made an effort to hold on to it, made no difference. So I'm just saying, for those of us who've been in this a while, the Archdiocese of New York is not exactly the easiest group to work with. Thank you guys very much for tonight, and we will hopefully talk in the future as we have more information. We'll give, and you can send us some stuff too about the land trust. Thanks a lot.
Make sure that I get Jesse all the bills. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
So we're going to go on to presentation regarding 517, 525 West 45th Street. However, first, I just want to note in the Dropbox are two letters. Please mark them up. One is an administrative letter, right, which is for Toro College. That's what Jesse said we use administrative. Is that everyone's recollection from our last meeting? Roberta,
I did not believe,
Jesse said he would go a little bit.
but this is in effect a letter that we have sent previously.
Right.
It is just a different.
Right. I think we read this letter a few times. So please mark it up, respond, so we can send it out, whether it's administrative or not, right? And it's helpful because we had a meeting, early on, but it's been out today. The second thing is 517, 525.
I'm sorry, and I apologize for missing the last meeting and not,
Yeah.
so was there a presentation or discussion at the last meeting? Is that what happened?
We had a presentation by the mayor's office.
Okay, and then, so you're saying that it's an administrative letter because.
I don't read,
Oh, you're not
Jesse said to me today, it's the photo of the administrative letter. I said, why don't you check the video to verify?
Okay, but you're saying otherwise we would vote on it at
At the full board.
the full board. Okay,
I have a clarifying question. What makes a letter administrative?
Sometimes, first of all, we have a time bar.
Right.
So we gotta get something out that doesn't meet our calendar, so it's just send us an administrative letter.
Can you all hear, Joe?
Can everybody hear me? No? So the other issue is, it may be something that doesn't rise to the level of full board action. That the board's been dealing with, or the district manager's been dealing with, so it's really an administrative letter.
okay. So it was voted on, or discussed and voted on at the last meeting to say, we have a problem with this and we're very concerned.
Yeah, there were some things like, there are no showers in this place, no bathing facilities.
Right, no, that seems great to talk about, but then it seems like we're also throwing in sort of our usual.
Right, that was the committee discussion. So again, please feel free to mark up or make changes or, suggestions.
Yeah.
And you email them back to myself and Maria.
Oh.
Then the next one is 517, 525 West 45th Street. Tom Taylor is here tonight to make a presentation, but we did get a presentation at our last meeting. And what we tried to do we said it was, we just sort of set the stage, Tom, for this, okay? This is one of the most complicated affordable housing buildings we've ever dealt with in our board. It is a layering of a building that was a loft building that was becoming legalized through the interim multiple dwelling law. It was rezoned during the course of it to be put in a residential zone. The building had ongoing harassment. So now we have this legalization through the loft board, and we have a cure for harassment. The owners came to this committee, I think at least 4 or 5 times, to make presentations on the cure for harassment. And 4 of the times, the cure they presented was not compliant, was not zoning compliant. I mean, it had so many issues with it that we kept sending them back to the drawing board. They presented incorrect drawings, the wrong building heights.
The owners.
The owners. So it was a really tortured process until we finally got to 2017, where all the pieces seemed to be in compliance. The tenants who live in the building were here. They made presentations, and our board then approved the multiply revised application for cure for harassment. And normally you would think that's where the story ends, right? There's a plan, it's a cure for harassment. There are 20% of the floor area of the building is affordable in perpetuity. And instead what happened is the owner did not comply with the harassment cure agreement. And those documents are reported against the property because it's a penalty. The city of New York did not monitor much until eventually it woke up and it defaulted the owner for a lack of compliance with the cure agreement, meaning the units, the square footage, the finishes. Remember, these things are detailed out. There's a set of plans that are attached to this cure agreement. And then something really curious happened in the middle of COVID. The Department of Buildings issued a temporary certificate of occupancy for the cure units, which were not in compliance with the cure agreement. That you cannot, under the zoning resolution, issue a certificate of occupancy unless HPD has signed off. DOB cannot take that action unless HPD signed off. And they did it anyway. Ready for this? At HPD's request. Because what I've been able to figure out is that all the staff in that department left. And those people reverted saying yes, like this. Yeah, they didn't know what the zoning requirements were. So they encouraged DOB to issue a different certificate of occupancy, even though the owner was in default on the very HPD agreements. And then the tenants in the building, both the long-term loft tenants and the folks, some of whom overlap, there's pure units and loft units together. They kept complaining, work not getting done. And here's the kicker. Once that TCO was issued, a TCO was issued for the market rate units. And the law says specifically, you cannot get a TCO for your market rate units if you haven't done your pure units. So the tenant group here has been, Tom, how long have the tenants been in litigation with various owners? When did that start, more or less? 1982. 1982, okay. So many of us are in this room, not me, who were not necessarily born in 1982. So that's how long this saga's been going on. So today, they made a solid presentation in our last meeting. Today is our efforts, and Tom Taylor is a long-term member of the Tenant Association. Their attorney was here last time, and their architectural consultant was here last time also. This letter is our effort at the first draft to go to the full board, and we'd like you, after this meeting, to review it, make sure we have no inaccuracies in terms of the complicated timeline here. But can you give us an update as to where you are today in this process? And by the way, was that fairly accurate so far?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Joe, you explained it far better than I ever can. This is, this has been an ongoing, life is filled with many interesting experiences, most of which aren't fun. So Joe gave a really clear explanation of where we are. The one addition I would toss in, Joe, is that now DOB has issued a letter of intent to revoke the underlying application for the building altogether.
For the actual alteration that was filed.
Correct.
Okay.
We don't know, where DOB is in this process. We presented them some information. When the DOB issued the letter of intent to revoke, the landlord responded by saying to DOB that because the building had previously been a loft building, and they claimed all they had done in the building was legalize the existing loft spaces.
No.
Which is not true, because there were previous commercial spaces which they went in and made 10 new free market spaces in those commercial spaces, which had never been covered by the loft law, and now are fully residentially occupied without any C of O whatsoever in the building. So we don't know what's going on with DOB in their process. Jordan Finder in Eric's office, through his good offices.
Eric Botcher, our council member.
I'm sorry?
Eric Botcher, our council member.
Yes. Back in May, he was able to put together a meeting with some of the tenants, DOB and HPD, so that we could ask some of these questions and find out better about what was going on with the agencies, because as I'm sure you all know, agencies in this city are reluctant to speak to the tenants who are actually directly impacted by their policies and actions. But we were able to meet there. We were able to tell DOB that these units, which were not loft units, and now have been renovated into free market units, are in fact occupied without a C of O, and DOB pretty much put their finger in their ear and twisted it left and right and said nothing to us. So through Jordan, we forwarded them the pertinent information showing that the units had never been registered with the loft board. That's completely clear. A couple of our tenants found online advertisements for renting these apartments. And we subsequently then, because of the way the package room is in the building, it's open to all the tenants who come in and out of the lobby. We were able to photograph mail labels going to people living in those units, again, substantiating that they in fact are occupied. As yet, we've not heard anything from DOB, and since that meeting in May, we've not heard anything back from HPD at all, period. One thing that Joe didn't mention in this is that HPD defaulted the owner back in July of 2020. The owner's response was to sue HPD. And that case was then dismissed in the spring of 21. There was some effort made between the owner and HPD to come to an agreement. The owner actually reached out to me and asked me if I would set up meetings with Mr. Botcher's office and with HPD and see if we could amicably come to an agreement. I set up those meetings and we never heard another word from the owner until they sued HPD for a second time. So that case then was settled in March. Once again, it was dismissed. Now they've made application to the appellate division to appeal that. I looked at the website this morning, and outside of the initial filing, they haven't moved forward. They haven't perfected their appeal with the appellate division, which I don't know if any of you have ever dealt with the appellate division, but it's a rather expensive process. So it's bizarre to us as tenants that instead of just doing the work and getting it taken care of, the owner is spending their time suing the city, which is not cheap. I mean, this isn't, you know, for $1.55, you go down and file your papers. This is costing them $30, $40, $60,000 a suit, which in fact would probably be about the amount of money that's required to do the renovations that HPD is requiring. So at this point in time, we as tenants, once again, we have no idea what HPD is up to. We have no idea what DOB is up to. As far as we can tell, DOB has stopped issuing TCOs. Since the last one, TCOs are 90-day based, and since the last TCO was issued and expired, we haven't seen a new one recently. So it appears that DOB has stopped doing that now. But basically what it means for particularly the tenants who, Joe also mentioned this as well, is that when this owner back in 2014 bought the building and knew that there was a cure requirement, the tenants said to the owner, some of the tenants might be willing to take the cure in their units, and therefore you don't have to give up any of your free market space. So 4 of the tenants agreed to do that, to go from being a loft tenant, which would become rent stabilized, to becoming a cure tenant, which would become permanent affordable housing. So
and rent stabilized.
Correct. But that meant that the owner wasn't forced to give up any of his, you know, valuable free market space because the tenants agreed to take that space. But now tenants are in spaces which they don't have the same appliances, they don't have the same appointments, they don't have the same finishes as required by HPD for their free market units. They're in units, for instance, where windows don't work at all. They're not functional. DOB has been in the building and violated them for electrical violations, which, you know, as you all know, electrical violations are an immediate hazard to the tenants and to the building. Those continue to exist without being cured. At the meeting that we had in May with HPD and DOB, our attorney, Seth Miller, attended that meeting as well, and at one point very pointedly said to HPD, when are you going to wake up? They're not doing the work. Instead, they sue you. You have legal remedies to resolve this problem, and yet you seem to refuse to take those steps. And HPD said, oh, well, you know, we try to work with the landlord. So we don't know how many times the landlord's going to sue HPD before HPD says, I guess they're not doing this work. I guess it's just not going to take place, period. But
So, Tom, let me break in to try to give some perspective.
please, yeah.
The cure for harassment is a very serious deterrent. First, it is very hard to get a finding of harassment, right? That's a serious thing. Tenants in our special zoning districts, Hudson Yards, West Chelsea, Clinton Special District, part of the Garment Center, if you want to get a building permit, you have to get a certificate of no harassment. You go through a process, you fill out piles of forms, you do a public notice, and the city does an investigation. I will tell you that 9.5 times out of 10, there was no harassment. Okay, it's a very high bar for there to be a finding of harassment. In the entire set of these districts, since 1990, when the first cure provision was put in place, there have only been 6 cures for harassment. So this is not like a huge thing that happens all the time. Out of those 6, every single one went through a regulatory process, construction, and has been completed and is occupied. Number 7 is this one. The only one where an owner has not complied. It's very rare that an owner would choose not to comply with a document recorded against the property. It's such an extraordinary, remember, the penalty is you've been found to harass people, and you are in essence giving up 28% of the floor area of your building, or 20% of the larger development, if it's multiple buildings or multiple sites, for permanent affordability. So this is a serious, serious penalty, and that's in perpetuity. So in this case, it is more than, it's not even curious, it's odd that there was not enforcement here. I really believe, Tom, that your issue hit right in the middle of COVID. A great number of people at HPD and DOB have left in attrition. The entire inclusionary housing department was overwhelmed because there was so much inclusionary housing trying to be built. And this thing has gone under the radar, and it is beyond belief that DOB would issue the TCO, but that worse, HPD would say, we need affordable housing, so issue a TCO, even though the units do not comply with their own agreement. So the guts of our letter here tonight is, we'll get additional information on the lawsuits, everything in detail, because we have it on YouTube, we can look at it again, embody it in there. But if you can look through this letter with a fine tooth comb, you and the attorneys you guys work with and whatever, to make it clear, we want this to be a record letter. And we've done this before. If you remember, Pete, remember we had the whole problem with the facade compliance? Like, we wrote a very specific serious letter from land use where street walls were not being maintained. And DOB actually wrote back to us saying, yes, you're right. And then revoked something and started again. This has to be a record of what has happened to help these people.
Right. But I'll be honest with you, I guess I'm surprised that we're not being even stronger in this letter. I mean,
I'm just at the start, go ahead and talk.
I guess I'm thinking like, it sounds like there's a very clear case that DOB and HPD have failed the tenants of this building.
Yes.
And I think that.
To enforce the legal requirements.
Yeah.
Their own.
And I think that should be the first paragraph, you know, because HPD and DOB have so far for several years or whatever, failed the tenants of this building in our district. And have failed to enforce the legal requirements, then, So, but I do think that we should actually be more forceful in this. And also we, in our conclusion, we say, oh, we think there should be another meeting. And prior to that meeting, these things that should happen. I think we should say immediately that these things should happen, right? Like, I think that we need to be, I actually think we should be more forceful.
You can be me whenever you want.
I think that, I have a question. A few years back, when Tom was one of the meetings.
When they came to this committee.
Yeah, the owners were here at
Yes,
that
all the
time,
time.
and they did not comply. They said they were going to do certain things with the plumbing. And I think it was the boiler.
This is a full renovation of many things. No. Many things have been done here. Nothing is complete. And nothing is in compliance with the documents that were executed.
Yeah.
And it's not, and today there are long-term loft tenants who are living in apartments that are partially renovated, that things don't work. There's sprinkler valves that don't work. This is a sprinkler building. And it was very specific. If you're going to do market rate units, you do, granite countertop, certain kind of cabinets, that would be throughout the building. The owners agreed to that in public and wrote back to us saying they would do it. So yes, beef it up is the first thing, make it more outraged. And then say, stop all this stuff now and meet and sort this out, agencies, with us.
Was there, I know you mentioned the penalties, 20% of the affordability.
20% of the floor area of a building, or 20% of the larger development.
Sorry, what would, if there's not compliance and this continues, is there another sort of punishment beyond that, or?
Well, I think.
What would be the next step?
Listen, when these agreements have enforcement mechanisms, like when you get to that, if you don't do this, the section at the bottom you never read, it's like all that stuff that happens, that's what should be invoked here. I mean, they can, I have done pure harassment, they are very specific. And I'm talking the inspections that we would get, the toilet bowl is 2 inches over to the left, doesn't comply with ADA. You can't get a C of O until you move that toilet back. That's the kind of specific inspections that happen. So that's why,
So there's some breakdown here is really the fact that HPD is not enforcing their own rules.
And DOB decided to act on its own, not on its own, they acted contrary. DOB, Department of Buildings enforces the zoning resolution. The zoning resolution says you cannot get a TCO unless HPD signs off. Like, it's very specific in the zoning resolution, and we're gonna get the citations on this stuff too.
So can that be revoked if these seals are already issued?
I think that's what's talking about reopening now, yeah,
Gotcha.
and that helps.
So, but I mean, the letter could also be, it sounds like they're saying that, the DOB is saying that they're gonna revoke the TCOs, right? And so maybe the letter should say, this is a letter in support of DOB's plan to revoke, because we think this is the
Like,
only
like
option.
we understand, like, if he has a letter or something, like he has a letter of intent to revoke,
Yeah.
we should attach that and say we support that.
Yeah, exactly. We support that because to date, DOB and HPD have failed the tenants of this building.
And then they sat in this meeting with, was it a month ago, Tom, right, or in late May?
Yeah, late May.
Yeah, and evidently the tenants, when they came to us subsequently, like, it was so unclear as to the issues we've been saying. And that's one of those moments that you get nervous if they're not even, they're obfuscating there. So, questions from Katie, sorry.
So.
Oh my God.
To me,
I was, you know,
Tom, I did, you indicated, in your explanation that some of the market rate units are currently occupied by tenants who have more recently moved in. Am I understanding that correctly? And then the letter here, what this is suggesting is that we would be requesting that the city revoke the TCOs for those units that are presently occupied, and then to relocate those tenants until the units.
if needed.
If needed.
And it's not like saying to do it, I pull that out. It's like, if there's a requirement, they would do it.
So, okay, it says if a lack of the TCO requires a tenant to vacate.
Right.
Are there, I mean, Joe, I guess this is the question to you then, is there a scenario in which the revocation of the TCO for those market rate units wouldn't require the?
No, what would normally happen is there wouldn't be enforcement on that. Instead, the lender would, I think like the most reasonable outcome here is there's a lender on this building. That lender would step in to try to sort this out, because this puts the lender at huge risk, not being in compliance with a whole bunch of things. And I mean, Tom is right, the entire ground floor of the building was commercial space, and that's been converted to apartments. That is not as part of the plan. I mean, it's just, there's like, I've never seen so many things wrong at the same time. Yeah, it would
Why
normally.
would they do that? Why would they take commercial space and turn it into residential?
Because the value of ground floor mid-block commercial space in a loft building that has 15-foot high ceilings, you're probably gonna get a very good rent for that, bro.
Well, yeah.
Much
So-
more than you're gonna get for mid-block commercial space.
So why would they convert it to residential?
Because the value as residential space in the mid-block, even on the ground floor, higher value. Higher value. Yeah. This is the, by the way, so everyone understands, this is a complex of like 4 to 5 loft buildings sandwiched together around a little funky courtyard. It's not like your big grand loft building. This is a thing that was added on, that like the top floors have huge high ceilings, there's units that are entirely facing in, you know, it's a whole. It's a very unique location.
Just to, the goal is not to, if there are market
No.
tenants who are not, ultimately complicit in the acts of the owner, there's no move to try and remove them from the building.
I think we should say, we'll clarify that to make it clear. It's all about compliance
Yes.
in the day, right? Any other members? Yes, Wilson.
Yeah, so I'm just, the one thing that kind of just stuck with me was that sentence about if a tenant has to vacate, right? And how we're trying to do good and how we're gonna potentially displace some of these families, even if it's temporarily, in the hardship that they may have to go through. So that kind of stuck in my mind, worrying about, okay, somebody had no fault on this and now they have to get relocated to where? And who's responsible?
I guess I want to say again, we need to focus on a developer, not on, if there were people who have come here paying $5,000 or $6,000 a month for one of these ground floor apartments, right? This developer created that situation. Therefore, it's his obligation if there's a problem and they cannot be occupied, to temporarily relocate those people. That's why we put that in here, say, it's not their obligation, it's his, it's the developer's obligation.
Thank you.
And, yeah. Other questions on this? So, given this complex sort of thing, we had already voted at our last meeting, right, on this. So we should be looking at this again to make notes, you know, clarifications, and this will go to the tenant association and their, you know, attorneys and everything to make sure we're not saying anything incorrect in this.
And with the changes that Katie recommended, making it more forceful.
Yeah.
But then the expectation would still be that we would vote on it at the end of June.
July. Yes, no, this is going toward July.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Anything else we missed?
No, I think what you're talking about is exactly right. And if you want to forward the draft to me, I will.
If you can contact Jesse, because it's in our Dropbox already, and then
okay.
Okay.
Very good. Yes, I'll contact Jesse about that and get a copy of that and give it to our attorney, Seth Miller, who was at the last meeting with you folks. And he can give it a review. And perhaps maybe, I mean, we're not interested in displacing tenants who are in units, even though they don't have certificates of occupancy. I mean, that certainly is not in our interest to have empty units in a building.
Right, but I do know for everybody's attention that we don't even know if they are properly and legally code compliant. And that's not a good thing for people to be living in a non-code compliant apartment. That's, you know, hazard. So I think we have to note that, and we'll make it clear on that particular point.
Right. And the other point of that too, Joe, is that my understanding, and again, I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is if they would comply with the cure agreement with HPD, which wouldn't take a lot of money and wouldn't take a lot of time, then they would have a C of O for the building.
That's right.
This is not rocket science. This is just obstruction. This is just, I refuse to do what I agreed to do because for whatever reason, I don't have to obey the law in New York City.
Well, we did see the developer present 5 sets of plans that were non-code compliant or inaccurate. So, Tom, thank you so much. And we will continue, the board will continue to stick to this building as let it be settled, which might be even older to us.
I hope to survive it.
Yes.
So to be clear, who's taking the lead of making the changes to this letter?
The 2 chairs do it.
Oh,
Yeah. But everybody adds in their comments because it's in the Dropbox now. So you can add in comments to that.
We email them.
Yes. Yeah.
Email them or?
Email.
Okay.
You know, mark up, make notes on it.
So we would say.
Comments on the side.
Building number 37.
Yeah.
Suggested.
Exactly, right. And then we have a time to put it together.
Well, why do you ask me then? You've been here a long time.
No, because we didn't have all this kind of, we didn't have this technology stuff. No. This was letters went out, you went to a meeting,
Yeah.
Well, you went to the board, they didn't have,
they were,
Well, yeah, but.
no, Dropbox. Everybody, I think our agenda tonight was brief. Anything else anyone wants to? So,
I do want to add something. This letter, actually, I was looking at my notes from last month. It was supposed to be an admin letter from Jesse. I also noted to myself to listen to the video, so I'll do that before I make some edits.
good, and Jesse's got to also confirm that too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess, sorry, yes, Katie.
So I don't even know what the right, maybe this is under new business or something. And again, I wasn't here last month. I missed the whole discussion, my fault. But I am.
Wait, Katie, and just for everyone who's virtual, what Katie and I are referencing is the mayor's community affairs unit letter. It wasn't in the Dropbox.
The Touro College.
Yeah.
The Touro College,
Yeah. So I guess I just want to share, and I know, so we are still asking for comments on it, even though it's gonna be an administrative letter, is that right?
Sure.
Okay, so and I will go back and listen to the discussion. I will say that I feel like, I have some concerns about that.
I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
You have comments to the letter,
Uh-huh.
which represents the discussion that happened.
Uh-huh.
You should offer them. but as for the approach, that was already talked about by a full group and
Right.
voted on.
Yeah.
So I don't look at that again, because we've done that.
Okay, I think this is more about just generally, a comment, not about that, because you're right, I mean, I wasn't here, I don't know what was said. But I think it's a comment about, going forward when we're hearing about these different, things that are coming up, with in connection with asylum seekers or different shelters that are being opened. I just want to share that I have a concern that we're a little bit at risk of not being our most effective, because I feel like every single asylum seeking shelter or homeless shelter that has opened in the last couple of years, we have the same response to. We're overwhelmed, we're too full, we don't want it, there are safety concerns, and it just worries me, especially because of the way so many other places are reacting that tend to be very conservative. And it worries me that we have many of the same talking points as very conservative communities. And I feel like that isn't us. And I just want us to be thoughtful. Of course, we want to represent the needs of our community, but I feel like we're becoming a little knee-jerk reactive to some of these. And when I read this, I'm like, is this really? So anyway, I'm just a little concerned. I just want us to be alert to it.
Dolores, quick question for Katie. I think I hear what you're saying about the pattern in the letter about mentioning we have too many in the community. I don't think it's a problem, but I'm curious if for you it is, like, what would be a different approach instead?
Yeah, I guess I would say like this one, we're saying, you know, we have too many and we need people to come talk to us. My impression is, and again, I haven't listened, that is what they did. They came and they spoke to us and they said, this is the plan. So I'm like, we should actually acknowledge, like, yeah, you did the thing that others haven't. And so let's acknowledge.
It opened
right?
4 hours before our meeting.
Okay, and again, I've talked about this in the past. When the things are being done under these emergency orders, we just have to acknowledge it's been done. So it sounds like, in this particular one, like there are real issues about the bathrooms and about how they're going to shower and everything else. Like, let's address the specific issues of the place instead of that being at the very end and us going first with our same bullet points. We're too full. There are safety concerns. Anyway, I just hope that.
I hear what you're saying, but I think it makes sense to repeat the same things over and over. If there's an issue or there's a problem, then you need to repeat it several times. I love to use analogies of families or of dancing. And I think as a parent, right, when you see an issue with someone in the family or your child or your partner, you address it and you address it every time. And so I think it's okay to address it every time. And I think if we move it in the letter, that's okay, but I think it needs to be addressed every time.
Yeah, if it was specific to this, like, yeah.
Let's go to Dolores and Jessica, please.
So I just wanted to generally say that ideology and politics are very different from us advocating for the community. What has been expressed for the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years, has been directly the observations, the concerns, the issues of people who live within this community. If we personally feel that the world should be better, that we can do better, et cetera, that's not what we're trying to advocate for. We're trying to enhance the voice of the concerns that are brought to us in the community. So the fact that we continue to say that we have been oversaturated, which is we have been oversaturated by shelters and temporary shelters within this community. That's a fact. We don't see these types of facilities on the Upper East Side. We don't see them in Soho. We don't see them in Tribeca. We see them more prevalent through Hell's Kitchen, but also some in Chelsea. And what we have been voicing is that because of the concentration, there have been unintended consequences from bringing so many folks that are vulnerable into one small area. And so that is not about not wanting to advocate to solve these greater problems. That's reporting on what our issues are as spoken to us by the community directly, and working with the agencies to solve for those problems, the unintended consequences of the concentration that we have within the community.
Jessica, then Roberta.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm sorry to do this. I just want to confirm that we're talking about the letter in the Dropbox, 6/21/23 Churro. Is that, yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, because Katie, I often, not to make it a bit personal, like I often agree with your sentiment, and in this letter, I don't see it. And so I would love to even see what, if you were to redline this letter, where you would highlight the particular concerns, because I think there is obviously some language about the oversaturation and the challenges of communication, et cetera. But I think then it goes to, I think it's pretty clearly identifying the key factors that we're concerned about as it relates to this location. And so I think this is, we've tried to find that way to, like, frankly, compromise on this in terms of tone and specific, trying to be specific and responsive to the challenges. So maybe we can work on some edits offline, but I think, to me, this letter kind of finds that equilibrium. Maybe it's an improvement I see that isn't sufficient from your perspective, but I think it does a better job.
And I want to note the bottom line in this issue in front of us. The city of New York is housing 200 people in a college building without bathing facilities. I don't care about the emergency. They're doing it because they will grab anything possible to do this accommodation. And it is not a good spot for people to be in. They told us they would be walking to the Stewart Hotel 2 blocks away to take a bath. I mean, and then they said, oh, we're going to try to get the bathing temporary trucks, mobile showers. I'm like, okay, I understand emergencies, but like it was live, and it was yet a new agency. That's the other thing. We have never heard from the New York City Office of Emergency Management running a shelter. That's our 3rd agency. Okay, my God, I'm like Roberta.
So just responding to all of the comments that have been made thus far, I would recommend a couple of tweaks to the letter. I think it's incredibly important to add something perhaps in the background, but perhaps somewhere else in the letter, acknowledging the nature of the emergency, that it may be difficult to do the notifications. I mean, the city acts with impunity at times for all sorts of reasons, but in this case, I'm not saying it is, but it could potentially be justified given the humanitarian crisis that it is trying to deal with. And so couching everything within that language, I think, is incredibly important. These aren't, the traditional DHS shelters. This isn't the traditional siting process for shelters. It is highly unusual, and it's created a lot of problems. The other thing that I like about this letter is most of the problems have solutions. Right. There is or a recommendation.
We talked about that in the meeting. They have recommendations, right?
Where I think it's missing is the concentration. And I think there's probably a line, and this may be what Katie is getting at, and what maybe could be a good compromise, to add some form of a solution, understanding that, there is a concentration here. There are negative consequences both for individuals who are being cited within the shelters, and then residents who live here and people who work in this area. That's absolutely a fact, but that what DHS needs to start doing is engaging in some sort of planning process. It needs to be looking at other kind of community districts within the city that might be able to, where there's less of a concentration, that might be able to absorb some of the humanitarian challenges that this district has been called upon to answer. I think that's reasonable. There may be other elements that we would want to highlight here, but I think that would help. I can't speak for Katie, obviously, but I think that might help improve the tone, because I do think that the rest of the letter productively does offer solutions, like when it poses problems. And I do appreciate that about the letter.
So let's end today. I think we've got it. Everyone's gonna put notes, edits into this.
Can I just ask a structural question?
Yes.
So when we do edits, do we circulate it to the entire committee? Do we just send it to you? Like, what's the process?
You send it to the chair. That's what's been happening for the past,
That's what we do.
always done.
Okay,
Right, and then, by the way, offering edit doesn't mean they get figured, like, you have to incorporate it. Does it work, does it not work, the whole kind of letter, depending upon the continuum of everything else we've done too. Like, we're not gonna shift our position
right.
100% because we haven't, because we, like that kind of thing. So yes, it's the normal thing, send it and we look at it, try to figure out how to make it work and communicate back.
I have a
Yes,
question and a comment.
yes.
And maybe you have. So the in conclusion sentence or statement at the end, is that intended to kind of summarize the previously mentioned bullet points? Is that, I just wanted to.
Normally we try to write conclusions that talk about here are the actions that should happen.
Gotcha, okay, and then in that case, wondering, and I can add this in drafting too. If the proper shower bathing facilities where they said this is our plan, but we were asking for updates, that should also be added down there, okay. And just tied to Katie's comment earlier, I do want to acknowledge that I appreciate you kind of keeping the CB alert. And, one thing that I do value about CB4 in particular is its efficacy. So I'm wondering if, based on the kind of the ask at the end, if these would be building blocks for us, because basically we're asking for updates and information, and I'm wondering, and something about notifying the CB so that we can kind of stay up to date on all these developments. I'm wondering if those will help us have something to work off of in the future and have a more clear ask or, call for action or whatever that may be. And I think we're still like using these as.
This is like our 19th letter like this. So one of the problems is that the agencies have actually made public statements that they will not do X, Y, or Z without letting us know, and then like 2 days later, do A, B, and C. So we've been struggling with this because number one, this overwhelming issue with homelessness in general.
Right.
And you put the silent seeker crisis on top, which makes it really impossible to manage. And we're trying to figure out just to get the minimum back and forth. And we have, I would say to this committee, we have had Department of Homeless Services or Health and Hospitals. Roberta, how many times? At least 15?
Sure.
I mean,
Since 2020, I would guess more.
maybe more. And they come in there as a back and forth, and they actually get we have a relationship with people, commissioners, deputy commissioners, they really try to engage, and then it just gets blown away. So it's a very frustrating process for him. It's not going to get sorted out soon. So we keep trying to get the small wins of how do you do this? What do you do that? Security, like one of the things that Jesse Bodine, our district manager, dealt with right after this thing opened, like 5 days, there was no place for people to go. So all of a sudden, there were a whole bunch of people hanging out on the side of Penn Station, on the side of Moynihan, because they had no outdoor space. And then drug dealers came and try to sell to people. So we have Midtown. It's like, there's all these different things that we're trying to do. Like, for example, we're opening up a play streets on McCaffrey Park on West 43rd Street between 8th and 9th, because we have the huge asylum seeker hotels in the Row Hotel on 8th Avenue and 46th Street as a way for families need a place to go. They're in a hotel room. I mean, there's this whole sort of, so we're constantly trying to come up with solutions, but sometimes it's managed, sometimes it's not. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
You have to keep putting it out there to get to manage.
Obviously, it's not happening as quickly as we would like to hope, but I think, I don't know what's holding them off of like adding us to their checklist. I mean, that seems like a pretty basic.
Well.
We've had that conversation.
The people who we talk to, they say, well, we're not opening anything the next 48 hours. There are so many different agencies that then it's some other agency that opens something 48 hours later. And also they're so big. They're so
Sometimes the same
bureaucratic.
thing.
They literally don't know what, and because it's all under
We have had-
emergency order, it's not that anybody is doing anything evil. It's just that they are overwhelmed. And so we're trying to find out an effective way to help have input here, and